This is Ashley Newby, and you're listening to the Black Studies Podcast, a Mellon Grant-sponsored series of conversations examining the history of the field. Our conversations engage with a wide range of activists and scholars, senior figures in the field, late doctoral students, cultural workers, political organizers, and everyone in between in order to explore the cultural and political meaning of Black studies as an area of inquiry and its critical methods. Alrighty. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Black Studies Podcast. Today, we have a wonderful interview with the phenomenal Jakeya Caruthers, Assistant Professor of English and Africana Studies at Drexel University. Hi.
Hi. I've been all right. I've been okay. How have you been?
I've been pretty good.
Good. We love to hear it.
Yeah. I know that, we met working in writing and rhetoric on the West Coast. But you have worked in an Africana Studies department. You currently are both English and Africana Studies. So let's talk a little bit about what drew you to the field of Black Studies. Like, how did you get into it? What keeps you committed to that field?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, as we were discussing before we got started formally, Black Studies is interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary. It's not undisciplined, but there are a lot of ways in which it's sort of ungovernable. So it's, though there are like ways to be like formally trained, and you and I were talking just a while ago about formal training, about having a degree or a credential in African and African American studies or Afro-American studies. But there are so many people who approach it from the side, and I'm one of those people. And I have a lot of respect and a lot of room for making a crucial difference between a formal education and a credential in Black studies versus this kind of idea that it's something that people casually do, because I think that it's a problem to imagine it as something that folks casually do. Like if you, engage with Blackness as your object or something of study, that's the same thing as Black studies, and it's not. Like I have respect for that understanding that it's not. But at the same time, like I feel confident. And I'm ready to say with my whole chest that I was doing it the whole time. And not everybody's doing it the whole time, but I think that I was, which is to say that, like I always understood that, and I got an education, even though, my graduate program didn't have a department. It only recently got a department. And even now, it doesn't yet have a formal graduate certificate or PhD program. So there was no opportunity for me to get credentialed in graduate school in that way, nor in my undergraduate HBCU education, no Black studies. And yet, my seeking out opportunities to understand the sort of analytic methods of Black studies through my work, through sort of piecemeal coursework, through, a Black feminist theory class or performance and race and performance or gender and colonialism, like trying to capture the multidisciplinary study and thinking about Blackness Blackly, doing it Blackly, I've always been doing. So what keeps me committed to the field and what got me interested as a cultural studies scholar, as a Black feminist scholar, is thinking about the ways in which Black cultural arts or expressive arts and cultural production are doing the political work of liberation, of Black liberation struggle, which is at the ground of Black studies. That's what its aim is, on an intellectual register, on a political register, on a practical register. And I think that, to go back to what I was initially saying about just kind of casually understanding Black people or Black things as your objects of study isn't the same thing of having that kind of intellectual political aim, or pursuing inquiry based on that aim. And I always was, including my inquiry into even humor studies, which is what my dissertation and monograph work are attending to, or Black feminist anti-carceral work, which I also do in the context of literature and cultural production, the ways in which literature thinks about carcerality and thinks about abolition. All of that is attuned to Black liberation, which is also attuned to everybody's liberation. So, through my little rogue agenda of coursework is how I got into it. And my rogue agenda that was pursued because I had an investment in Black liberation since the 5th grade, being a little baby militant. And even then, right? So just quickly, like I've been doing Black studies since the 5th grade, because I grew up in a really white town, Knoxville, Tennessee. And I was trying to negotiate questions of race in ways that were borrowing from a kind of mass popular and sort of sometimes sort of surface kind of aestheticization of Black politics. So 5th grade is 1992, so everyone's wearing an X cap, for example. Mm-hmm. And so I'm all like, well, all right, Malcolm X, let's go. And my parents were like, have you read a book, honey? Let's start with books, because there's there's no kind of it's not like I can go to an Afrocentric school. That doesn't exist in my town. It's absolutely not like there's any kind of Black studies curriculum that is meaningful at all in grade school. And we're seeing all the rollbacks of what that looks like in grade school now. I'm having to correct my teachers. So my parents are helping me to get an education through literature, through books. And not that they could teach me. They didn't have a Black studies education either, but they were like, if you're gonna say Malcolm X all the time, you're gonna need to read about Malcolm X. And then, because I'm the baby of the family, my older sister would give me her books. So I'm reading Asada's biography in the 7th grade because she's leaving it, lying around from her work. And she's not doing Black studies either, but she's taking a class. And so it's sort of it's a system of knowledge. It's about knowledge transmission, again, toward a particular aim and agenda. And it's one that I always had, whether it's this poster of Black firsts that I have, which we sort of undermine as this kind of provincial Black History Month contained and problematic. And sometimes we even use pejorative language like Hotep kinds of education about history and about ourselves. But that's the kind of knowledge that's lacking. There is no sort of opportunity to have Black knowledge received by osmosis, the way that it would be when it's a poster in your bedroom in the 6th grade or whatever, where when I got to an African American studies program as a lecturer and as the associate director of the program, and I've got this picture of Katherine Dunham, and nobody knows who she is. No one's ever heard of Katherine Dunham. And I'm realizing that my education about Katherine Dunham as an anthropologist, as a person who's giving political and intellectual meaning to movement, who is instantiating studies and embodied epistemology, who's thinking about political relationships through dance, all these kinds of things that she's doing. Never heard of her. But when I heard of her, it was on a poster that I had in my bedroom in the 6th grade, because it was a desire to have a relationship to Blackness, to Black people, to Black thought, toward Black liberation, wherever I could get it. So I don't have a degree in African American studies, but I got this poster and I got these classes and I've got this intention. And I've got this like investment in rigorous study and in rigorous and committed and devoted engagement with these analytic methodologies.
So that is a wonderful point to come back to something that we were also discussing before, right? Like that difference. Like I do have a degree in African American studies, but as you started with, it is multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary. Yes. And when it comes to most of the remaining PhD programs, you're a dual, you're taking classes in multiple departments, right? Like even most institutions who have Black Studies PhDs cannot support a Black Studies PhD solely in an African American Studies department. And so from the institution that I came from, right, everybody picked their secondary field. And that was where you took a lot of the methods courses and things like that, right? And so you stated, and I think correctly, right, that like doing Black studies, the difference between doing Black studies and making Black people the object of your research is really about that commitment to the ultimate liberation of Black life, which liberates all of us. How do you see in the current state that we're in, where a lot of departments are made up of people who have not been formally trained in Black studies? It's just not possible for them to be majority formally trained Black studies people. But when you're trained in the traditional disciplines, primarily in the traditional disciplines, and maybe you don't have that supplement that comes even in those Black studies departments that make you do a dual situation, how do you think that commitment can really be seen? And I think especially if we're thinking about like how Black studies came about, right, through student protest and demand,
right,
we're in a different situation now in a lot of ways. And I think there are questions that can be asked about the alignment of where Black studies in the academy is today with why it was started, right? And so maybe what do you think about that infusion and maybe where it can go from here, given where we're at?
I mean, I think it to speak of the like beginnings, and it's so hard to even talk about the beginnings because then that requires us to sort of rely on institutionalization as the origin or the foreground of Black studies, and it's not like that. Then what are we supposed to do with people doing their work even outside of like formal education period? Like that's not going to work. So if we think about the kind of like grassroots possibility of Black studies, and Fred Moten talks about Black studies as a dehiscence or like a rupture at the edge of the institution, as a kind of like a provisional, or it starts out and it's supposed to be, and it really does remain in some corners, a kind of like provisional intervention into like the epistemic regimes, the like institutional economic and political regimes of the institution. That has to happen, the ways that it like maintains its place on the edge and its sort of intellectual edgy, and not for the sake of edge, but for the sake of doing its liberatory work. I think it has to happen on a grassroots level. So, at my institution, I'm a part of a cluster hire in Africana studies. Most of the folks, everyone actually, is in history except for me. And there was a kind of, actually I'm about to start telling business, so I'm going to roll this back. What I will say is that in many cases, there's an impulse to try to use the tools of the institution and to like kind of be like technical about how we raise up the like explicit and implicit and inherent importance of Black studies, Black methodologies, as apart from the disciplines. So, for example, even though your tenure home, which is nasty work, is in a particular discipline or whatever, which has so many implications for how we do our work, or the way that classes are listed, or all these other kinds of things. Like there's all these little like technical tricks that we can do to try to make sure that we're naming the importance of Black studies, where we're not going to cross list with any other thing because it's only Black studies. We're just only doing Blackness, or we're only engaging the field of Black studies and all of its sort of like interdisciplinary manifestations, but without the encroachment of the disciplines through, calling it also English 201 or whatever. But that's not where the work is done. The work is done, because who cares, right? In the end, that's not always going to be possible to have a program that does not have the encroachment of the disciplines, including through the fact that most of the faculty are disciplined or credentialed in disciplines or whatever. That's impossible for the reasons that you just said, like structurally, historically, it's impossible. So there has to be like a kind of like grassroots mobilization inside the classroom or in our other kinds of like extra institutional, anti-institutional work that can, and make sure that those kinds of things cannot be co-opted by the disciplines. We were talking a little bit about African and African American studies at the institution where we met at Stanford, and about all the sort of like elements of Black study that happened, and the modalities, the methods of Black study that happened, and the features of it that were like, that sought to be policed besides just, like, again, these technical questions of like cross-listing. But the fact that we would be having, and you were part of them, like you would visit with us and saw like what this looked like, where we'd be having like, a salon, an informal salon, doing eating snacks, being loud, listening to music, like engaging in debate, doing informal, radical, basically teach-ins outside of the curriculum, in a place that we designated as the place for Black studies to be happening. So not in the African American literature course that's in the English department. No. You come here, like to this place that's literally not a classroom, to do that kind of work. So I think the way that we get around it is the way that we always got around it, which is to say, get around it on purpose, right? I don't think that we can pass through the institution to fix this problem. I think that it's possibly a problem with, and I put scare quotes in case this is only audio. It's a problem with a lot of potential for our continued like radical, provisional, outside, fugitive sort of work. Like I think that the way we get around it is by making to quote Tony K. Bambara, a dream of a Black university, and Nikki Giovanni and all these other great folks, I'm going to talk about them a little bit later, like in an actual elsewhere, like not, I mean, we talk about the otherwises and the elsewheres or whatever, like in sort of abstract terms, but no, we actually need to do it elsewhere. Like we get out of that English department classroom and go outside of the door, and be elsewhere. It's now defunct, but this is the last thing I'll say about it, but like a really beautiful and brilliant, well, even this podcast actually in podcasts, but there was a really brilliant project that was a bookstore. It's like in a corner of a record store. So like I'm already loving what this is doing. And I only found out about it because I follow some folks who are doing Black studies at Howard, Greg Carr, the great Greg Carr, who was describing this bookstore, which had all these first edition, like broadside press books, like all these, and I don't know how and where. The person who ran it is named Anya Boule Love, who is a professor at the Community College of Philadelphia here, and does all this other really wonderful work. I just can't speak his praises enough. But Greg Carr described this as a fugitive university because you can buy the books, but mostly it was like a library because they're rare. It's like a special collections place, but not special collections like it would be in, the special collections space in the library, in a university library.
Credentials to be able to walk
exactly
in there.
Exactly. And wash your hands and do all these other kinds of things. And one should be careful with this very precious work. But his mode of care for doing this was like, all right, well, for the things that are not for sale, you have to sit here. You have to sit here and study. And I'm going to be here to talk with you, and anybody can be here to talk with you about these things that you're studying or thinking about, or the pictures that you're going to take or whatever. While this rare, the gospel disco track is playing because we're in a record store and it's, up in what's now called Brewery Town, and having a conversation about where we even are or what the neighborhood is. So I think to get outside the discipline is to get outside all the disciplines, to get outside even the institutional space altogether. If we're going to challenge these sort of like hegemonic epistemic regimes, that is what Black Studies is about like amplifying subjugated knowledges. We have to do that. We have to do that, period. Amplify subjugated knowledges, like through our practice by, liberating them from the sort of the constraints of discipline, but like doing that in a concrete and a practical, and not just in an abstract or an institutional technical way, because again, that's not quite going to work. That was a long answer. But.
No, it was an amazing answer. So thinking about the fields and departments and what we're doing to get outside of these constraints that are placed on you when you're in academia, and the stigma that is attached to, being that other thing over there, right? In area studies rather than a discipline or a field. I'm also very curious about the work that we do in the classroom. Like, I know that us both, one of the things that I really appreciated about the unit that we worked at Stanford before you went to the Black Studies program there, was the amount of effort that went into pedagogy, right? Yes. And I think that being at larger universities, being in more in departments, whether there's traditional or even like in an African American and Africana studies department, I think that too often when you're an R1 and the tenure track is the thing, the pedagogy is not talked about as much, right? And so I want to hear your perspective on what we do in Black Studies classrooms that can also create those other spaces and move us outside of the confines that have been placed on us institutionally.
Yeah. Speaking a word, because it's so frustrating, because that's the work is studying together and studying generationally, which is what the so-called teaching and being taught, is. Like doing one's research in order to say something and be the only person saying it, and saying it toward a functional, instrumental end, instead of toward, again, like this project of liberation, which is going to require everyone. So the classroom is a wonderful place for these encounters that bring in the everyone. I definitely resonate with this, with the impulse to diminish the meaning of the classroom and pedagogy. I sometimes feel embarrassed to talk as much as I do, or it's not even complain, but like grapple and wrestle with the classroom, because the wisdom is, I mean, you're not going to get tenure this way at an R1, and these kids don't matter. First of all, we refer to them as kids, so these kids don't matter, and that because of strangely a profound diminishing of the value of teaching as a practice, and generally in our whole culture. I mean, we can see this in the way that teachers are paid, grade school teachers are paid, or like really disgusting aphorisms like, if you can do, if you can't teach, like these awful things that people say, even though people can't teach, couldn't do it to say that, like, they would die, like literally disintegrate if they were asked to be in a classroom. So there's a kind of like just general devaluing of schooling and of education that we all internalize even before we get into the academy, that came from our being students, which is really unfortunate and heartbreaking. So I sometimes again feel a little bit ashamed thinking about it, but the fact is, all of my work is done in the classroom. Anything that I've ever tried to study, I piloted it and made and tried to make theory in real time in the classroom, like with my students. It's the place where the work is done, or it's one of the places where the work is done. But in that way, everything should be the classroom, including your writing. Like all of that should be classroom kinds of work. So I've been so privileged and feel so uplifted and so moved by the scholars that I admire most, who are doing the most, what the sort of like our one girls are like also admiring the most and uplifting and awarding and celebrating for their research, happen to also be some of the best teachers, some of the folks who are like amplifying and writing about their pedagogy, and in each of those cases, in every single one of those cases, also talking about the ways in which their pedagogy is meant to do liberation work. So I'm thinking of people like Iana Hawkins Owen or Ramalika Imhotep, who I like, people I follow on Instagram for their school content, for their classroom content, and whose work I read, and who do all these brilliant experiments inside and outside of the classroom with teaching, whether that's the Church of Black Feminist Thought, which is this like brilliant community kind of classroom, the principles of which are brought into the institutional classroom at the university, that I'm then borrowing from to do my work. In a class that I'm teaching now called Black Noise, there's kind of like this meta interrogation of Western hegemonic regimes of knowledge through the kind of work that we do, like how we position ourselves, where we're doing our work. I'm compelled to constantly think about teaching. What was the question? Wait a minute. In terms of how we do this, how we do Black study in the classroom, I think pedagogic method through very specifically experiment is the way that we do it. So this class that I'm teaching now, Black Noise, for example, is the subject of the class is Black experimentation in culture and in politics and in thought, but the class itself is an experiment. And one of the things that is really striking to me is when I'm asking students to like talk about what the experiment of the class could be, they're at a total loss. Like they're really sort of confounded by the possibilities of this, which instantiates to me the necessity of it. Like if you can't even if your imagination is so arrested, then come on, this is where you need to be. And I think that if the classroom is about unleashing imagination, and it has to be, for this this otherwise world, these elsewheres, etc., then it's not going to work to be like to be basic and to be uncommitted, like in the classroom. That like teaching is there is a Black studies methodology for teaching as well, that involves, and again, like I'm almost embarrassed to even say it because of the ways in which we've all been disciplined so much against passion, against emotion and affect, against these other kinds of things. To say something like spirit is a part of it, then sort of suddenly makes me like under intellectual, or suddenly makes me unrigorous. But why isn't spirit a part of it? Why isn't imagination a part of it? Why aren't like principles of radical democracy a part of it? Or like Black care a part of it? Like, why aren't the in history classes, like if you're reading about Ella Baker doing radical democracy, why aren't you doing radical democracy in practice? And I'm just so admiring when I've sat in on classes, or even when I'm observing them from afar, like on social media, when that kind of thing happens, when the lesson is put into the practice, like of teaching, when it's a kind of echo and a reverberation that's happening. And when we insist, like maybe we need to start like, if we're shady and we are often, like that's a difficult aspect of Black studies as a field or as an industry, to like push our work forward by through insult. I don't know, maybe it's ritual insult, like the dozens. You need to come correct. I wish that we would do that too about teaching. I really wish we would.
Me too.
Yeah. Me too. You have to be a teacher. You have to be a good teacher, or you're not doing this. Yeah. All of your claims are false.
Yeah.
If you are not doing this in the classroom.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, like, for me, the reason why I even knew I could get a degree in Black studies, the reason why I even went this trajectory with my career was because of a teacher, right? It was my writing teacher who was working on his PhD in Black studies. And it was like, oh, that's a thing? Like, I can do that? Oh, let me go do that then.
Yes.
And so like, it always, to me, like teaching is so central to the work of Black studies that the disconnect and the conflict that happens in these institutionalized spaces with the devaluing of teaching is really disheartening. Because it's like you have to, though. Like, that's what Black studies does. It expands our possibilities, and it does integrate that imagination, because it's coming from a place that's deeper than just learning to recite information.
That's right.
That has been cultivated in such a way that is deemed acceptable.
Yes. Yes. And I think to that end, we have to think about teaching as a verb, as which it is. I mean, I don't know that people don't think about it, but more than that, I think we need to start thinking about teacher as an elevated like position to aspire to. There's a kind of like figure or a trope within like Black political literature of like the colored lady teacher. For example, in Toni K. Bombar's The Lesson, or Richard Wright is talking about these teachers who are maligned actually in the neighborhood, usually because they're doing very threatening work to the status quo, because they are at the edge of all manner of regimes, including possibly like patriarchy and its role in knowledge. So I'm speaking now about Black feminism and Black women teachers. That I think that there's something to be to be proud of and saying, I'm the teacher. This is who I like. This is not just what I do, or it's my job, or it's the day job, or what have you. But I have like aspired to become the professor.
Mm-hmm.
Though I think teacher probably does even better work, because then that like,
yeah.
Because then that is, it's simultaneously more humbling, but also more active. I recall being at it was like an Oscar grant mobilization in Oakland, and I ran into a student who like was happy to see me and then ran away and then came back. And I was just so moved when they brought their friend, and like, they didn't say anything more, but they were just like, this is my teacher. Which is to also say, well, this is who she is, but also this is why I'm here. This is my teacher. The kind of seed planting that we're doing, like, is a privilege. Like it's just the highest form of what we who have chosen this life can do, with respect to like liberation struggle. So to like undermine it, is wasteful. It's like just truly wasteful. I love reading. I'm going to actually put it, I don't know if this is going to be video, but I'm going to hold it up. This really wonderful Lost and Found series, by the City College. Yeah.
Okay.
So there's,
where can I get this?
I low-key think they might be out of print, but it's this really wonderful like document initiative by CUNY to pull together these like rare published writing by like luminaries, writers, organizers, like all these really famous people who we understand through their other work. Like we think about Toni Cade Bambara as a theorist and a novelist, and as an organizer, but also a professor. Let's just remember that she was also a professor in the CUNY system. Audre Lorde, we got her, this wonderful series includes her syllabi, or June Jordan, right? That there was a time that they were passing through and doing this work in the university, and they were doing it in a way that is in no way alienated from these other kinds of identities that we have for them as organizers, as theorists, as novelists. Like that, all of these things are absolutely conflated with their work in the classroom. So amplifying this and bringing it to light is brilliant, and I think that there's something that we can learn from it. That Toni Cade Bambara, all the things that we know and think about her as a legendary visionary freedom fighter, the classroom is another place where we can see her doing it. And it's just such a beauty. It's been so incredibly inspiring to me to read this, and to remind myself about like why the classroom is a space. It's a perfectly reasonable space for me to do my work.
Thank you. That was really inspiring. As I'm thinking about these things for myself, I think that was a wonderful, not only did you provide some sources that I have to go to,
LOL,
but you also really spoke to this intersection and the way that these things, they don't exist in isolation. And right. So, you can do both, and you need to do both.
You must. Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, you must do both. So
given that, what is most interesting and exciting to you about the potential future of the field?
I mean, the same things that excited me about the past of it, which is to say, like, the role of the poets, the demands of like serious problems, like how we're being forced into new kinds of urgencies. For example, the planet is about to force us into into something. Like we're about to be in like everything. I feel like I'm constantly like freaking my students out. Like, first of all, like they don't know better, but because they know better than I do. But like, okay, hold on. in like 20 minutes. It just really will not be long before the weather is all we'll ever be able to think about. Like it's going to radically change everything. So I'm excited about the ways in which Black Studies is like, oh yeah, we got something for that. We have some thoughts about how to move in the context of disaster, because there will be disasters, or in the context of crisis. Because Black Studies has a way for also thinking about like radical ecology and ways of being with the earth, like intercommunal. Frederick Douglass talking about, having relationships like with animals, is a wonderful lesson for figuring out how we might have to coexist when the sort of edifices and institutions and structures that keep us barriered from the rest of the earth are going to literally crumble. And we may not have the same like luxury of our like regimes of dominion over the earth, which are problematic. And then it's not a luxury either. Like that's sort of based in imperialist, colonialist, like understandings of species and understandings of like domination as a legitimate way of relating. And Black Studies and Black life is like, or not, actually not. Yeah. And the power and through literal brute force of those kinds of understandings of things have gotten us to where we are. So there are ways in which it seems like maybe these interventions haven't worked to stave off these kinds of disasters. But there's something possibly about the ways in which even the Black Studies from the past and the answers that came from the past were like prophetic and are about to be right on time to not save us because it's too late. But sorry, that's so simple, but to if we're gonna have to make something new, or if we're going to have to survive under different kinds of terms, that there just might be answers for that.
Yeah.
And I'm moved by actually by how the poets are in conversation with the scientists for this kind of thing, and how the poets are the scientists. I'm excited by the sort of abolitionist potential of Black Studies. And I have a colleague, the wonderful Nick Mitchell at UC Santa Cruz, whose work that is like critically tracing the institutionalization and origins toward the detrimental ends, possibly, that we've named already. Is the same person who's also kind of at the forefront of university abolition studies. And that I don't think that's a coincidence at all, that there's something about Black Studies that has, as universities like dig deeper into fascist neoliberal demands, those things are also being resisted by the very market forces that they're driven by. So it's like, it's not going to take much to flick that over, and the pandemic brought that to the fore. But it's not enough to just let it devour itself. There's something about like the abolitionist impulse that is asking us to think about well, what else should we make? Prison abolition, for example, is not about like the negative about unmaking. It's about making new things. And so there's something about like Black Studies broadly understood, not just the institutionalization of it. In fact, not the institutionalization of it at all, but like the true spirit of Black Studies, like, is the other side of that abolitionist impulse, is the other side of like what will happen when the university crumbles, as not only as it should, but just as it's going to, because it set itself up to do so. Well, Black Studies has an answer for that. And I'm super excited about that. I'm super excited by all this attention, and it's certainly not new, but maybe in the last like 7 or 8 years, actually decade really, of like people attending to, like Sylvia Winters, and very important questions about like, what are we even doing with Black studies? What are we even doing with the sort of like foundational premises that are making us beholden to like a racial liberal idea that's looking for assimilation, that's looking for like humanity or humanism. Like what? Like why are we asking those questions? Let's ask different ones. If this is a species level problem, let's do something else. Let's think differently about disciplines. Let's think differently about wonder and all these other sorts of things, about our inquiry. All these folks are paying attention now and like Black Studies is having a moment of historiographic examination in a way that I think is bringing like its true like potential back to the fore. Like I think there are all these brilliant projects. My colleague Tasneem Siddiqui is working with Abdul Al-Kalimat, like super important foundational voice in Black studies to try to like think about, all right, again, how are we going to go back to our roots? How are we going to like in the ways that Black studies has become diffuse in a way that is not what we always wanted it to be in terms of its like lack of discipline or lack of disciplinary ruliness. I don't mean it's like undisciplined in that way, but like it's all over. It should be all over the place, but in the ways in which it's become all over the place through co-optation and through absorption and submergence and subjugation and all these other kinds of things. Let's bring it back to something. All these brilliant like radical projects that folks are doing out of the South. And through like historically Black universities doing their work at the edge where a Black studies program might not exist, by looking to the past, by looking at these old kinds of documents, and trying to remember what Black studies was meant to be in 1966, 67, 68, 69. So much more of that is happening. I'm excited about what we get when we look at that. And I think we're going to get something good. I'm excited about, again, like the sort of like fugitive spaces of the university. There's a really great text in The Black Woman, also Toni K. Bambara edited, because she's thinking about education all the time. But Nikki Giovanni has this really great piece called I Fell Off the Roof One Day, where it's so great and so funny, where she's talking about, can I read it to you?
Of course.
It's just so good. It's obvious that we need a Black university, she says. Like, yeah, it's obvious.
Obviously.
She says the questions raised about the Black university center around things like, should we try to build buildings or should we function in any way we can? In Harlem, I'm told there are 500 churches and 300 bars. To me, that makes 800 school buildings to be used as we see fit. It would be a beautiful sight to see a sign hanging from Small's Paradise Lounge, Afro-American history from 1664 to 1886, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. daily. Professor Lerone Bennett, guest lecturer this week. Or to pass Abyssinia Baptist Church's sign, 1150 to 335, Dr. Matthew Walker, lecturing on the alimentary canal as a response to the liver during emotional crisis. Or Andres, where we learn that Friday and Saturday only, Louis Alcindor, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, will give demonstrations of defensive playing during the last 3 minutes of a tight game. Or at the Apollo, Reverend James Cleveland in demonstration lecture of what music has meant to him. There will be 3 classes daily. Register now. Yeah, that's the Black university, and we ought to be putting it in motion. We can do it all over the nation. We can move people around that need to be moved around and have the people in local positions who can function. We can set our standards and give our own degrees if we want to deal with that kind of thing. A piece of sheepskin is no more and quite a lot less than lamb's wool. So much more that she says about this, but it's like if we could just understand that, as she's saying, the Black University already exists. It's for us to recognize it, not create it. I think through the memory work that we're doing right now, it's that is our capacity to remember it, not just to not create it, to recognize it, not create it. And I think we're doing all this wonderful, like recognizing. I'm super excited about it. And I'm super excited about all the different places that it's going to live. So, yeah.
Thank you. That was amazing.
This was amazing. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
This was so interesting. I learned so much. And I really appreciate your time. Yeah, anything you want to leave us with? Is there any social media you want people to follow you on? Do you have a book coming out? Anything?
I mean, a book that is out is co-edited, double volume, Abolition Feminisms, on Haymarket Books. Please check that out. Thank you. Find me in the world, man. I definitely don't have any social media to promote, but I do. I mean, in terms of like resources, anybody who's listening inside and outside the Academy, there are some really wonderful archives and resources that we should point to. And one of the things that I love perusing all the time, because it's all online and I just can't believe it, is, for example, the Black World and the Negro Digest. You can read all of it. Excellent example of Black studies outside the institution happening. And you can read it right now. You can do it and study it wherever you are, like right now. So looking up taking advantage of digital resources is way more important than my social media, where I don't say anything at all of use. So.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you.